Hi, everyone. All right, so this is the lesson on types of sentences. So anytime you read, you will see tons of different types of sentences. You yourself write a variety of types of sentences that you might not even be aware of. So let's get into it. So writers use a variety of types of sentences to make their writing more enjoyable to read. For example, if you just read something that said, the dog walked across the street, the dog sniffed the plant, the dog went home. That would be really boring to read. So you want to vary your types of sentences to make it more exciting. And readers, so not only when you're writing, but when you're reading, readers can recognize a strong piece of writing by identifying different types of sentences. And the purpose, the whole reason that we're doing this is that it's important to know how to write well for people to take you seriously as you get older. If you always use simple sentences such as, I went to the store, then I saw my friend, we got some pizza, your writing will be very boring. Recognizing and using different types of sentences will make your writing more interesting to read, and people will be more likely to listen to what you have to say. So there are 4 types we are focusing on. So first thing, before we get into it, you need to know about clauses. So there are things called independent clauses and things called dependent clauses. And you can see that here. So you've got independent clause and you've got dependent clause. It's not as complicated as it seems. An independent clause, think of it as like a complete sentence. So it can stand on its own. That's why I put here independent clause, complete sentence. So like I hit my first home run last year, something like that. A dependent clause does contain a subject and a verb. So a subject meaning like a noun and a verb, but it's not a complete thought. So for example, after I hit my first home run last year, it's a dependent clause because it doesn't continue. There's nothing else with it. You're kind of like left being like, okay. So it's what's called a fragment. A fragment is whenever it's not a complete thought. But let's move down to simple sentences. So simple sentences, they have a subject and they have a verb. So like, I ate a whole pizza. So I, that's your noun. That's the person, place, or thing. Ate, that's your verb. That's your action. So that's all it has. Subject, verb. It could literally be, he cried. That would be a simple sentence. He, meaning the noun, cried, meaning the verb. Kyle and Tamir went to the movies. So got your subject, who it is. Went is your verb. And it's just one independent clause. There's no dependent clause in these sentences. It's just one independent clause. That's a simple sentence. Think of it as like your really basic sentences. Next is compound sentences. So you probably use these as well in your writing without even realizing it. These have the fanboys in it. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So pay attention to these fanboys. So if you see here, and let me actually circle, woo, right there. So a compound sentence, they have 2 independent clauses, meaning 2 parts of a sentence that could stand on their own. They could be like their own individual sentences, or to make your writing stronger, you combine them with one of these fanboys. So you could say, I love going to the movies, period. My husband and I haven't been able to go, period. But if you add a fanboys in there, it makes your writing more interesting. So in this case, we added the fanboys, but, B-U-T. I love going to the movies, but my husband and I haven't been able to go. And you may notice there is this comma here. Whenever you have a fanboys, you have a comma. Okay, if it's being used as a compound sentence. There are times you use and, or you use but, or so, where you wouldn't have a comma. That's only when it's not actually working as a compound sentence. So remember, compound sentence, 2 independent clauses. This here, I love going to the movies. It's a complete sentence. My husband and I haven't been able to go. Complete sentence. You combine those 2 independent clauses with a fanboys. Let's move down to complex. Here is where you start getting your dependent clauses, your fragments. So an independent clause, complete sentence. A dependent clause, it can't stand on its own. It can't like be taken out and make sense. So often a dependent clause will start with a subordinating conjunction. I know that's a confusing word. Look down here to see what those are. So we use subordinating conjunctions to fix run-on sentences. So if your sentence is going on and on and on and on and on, okay, you need to stop that. You got to stop the thought. So here's an example. Even though I love to swim with my family, comma, we couldn't go last year. So right here, we couldn't go last year. That is an independent clause because it would make sense on its own. We couldn't go last year. Okay, it's a complete thought. So that's your independent clause. That's the I. And this is your dependent clause, this underlined part. That's why I have it underlined here. That is your dependent clause. It's your fragment. It doesn't make sense on its own. Even though I love to swim with my family. You're like, okay. Like you need more than that. And notice there's that subordinating conjunction, even though. So right there. And they're down here. So although, after, as, because, before, if, since, though, unless, until, whenever, whereas, wherever, while. Those are all examples. Here's another sentence. My mom painted the walls while I brought in the boxes. So your independent clause is my mom painted the walls. It would make sense. You could have a period there. The sentence makes sense. While I brought in the boxes, that's your dependent clause. It doesn't make sense if it's left on its own. And you'll see the subordinating conjunction here of while. If your subordinating conjunction is at the second part of your sentence, so it's after the independent, you don't have a comma. If your dependent clause is before your independent clause, there is a comma after the dependent clause. So just kind of use this as your model. And dependent clauses can also start with a relative pronoun. So your examples would be who, that, which. So like the student who worked hard on his project got an A. So that would be another example. And lastly, compound and complex. Those type of sentences are exactly how they sound. They're compound sentences with the fan voice, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And they're complex. So they're combining the two. So you want to look for a fan voice and a subordinating conjunction. So here's an example. And it has two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. So after the two soccer players lost their game, they joined their other teammates for lunch and they went to the movies. So our compound sentence is right here. Let's see if I can highlight that. That's our compound sentence because you have the two independent clauses. Independent clauses are like complete sentences. They joined their other teammates for lunch. There's one. They went to the movies. There's a second independent clause. And they're combined with the fanboys and. That's what makes this a compound sentence. That's the compound part. Then to make it also complex, they added a dependent clause. After the two soccer players lost their game, comma. So there's the subordinating conjunction, and this whole thing is the dependent clause. Because remember, it can't make sense on its own. That's why it's a dependent clause. After the two soccer players lost their game. So you're kind of like, okay, what about it? Like you're missing the rest. That's what makes a dependent clause. Here's another example. Here's our compound part. And here's the complex part, is this part. So the compound part, she likes to sleep in, but she can get up early if she has work. So here's your fanboys. It's combining two independent clauses, again, complete sentences. And then if she has to work, if there's your subordinating conjunction. And here is your dependent clause. That's the one that's like a fragment. It can't survive on its own. If she has work, doesn't make sense on its own. So that is your compound complex sentences. So that is all of it. I know that was a lot. Feel free to ask me questions about it, and we will be doing other things to help you kind of learn this and practice it.